4 in the morning, no sleep, and here I was just watching a Quantum of Conscious video, and he was talking about an interview with Michael Hoffman pertaining to his book. And I found this pretty mind-blowing, and so did Matt, and I'm going to share it with you. This lady is interviewing Michael Hoffman, and here's what she says. I've just read your incredible book, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. Quote, this demonstrates one of our simpler methods, realizing that our activities will sooner or later come to light. We structure our activities so that as conspiracy researchers unravel them, they will release information in such a way that it mirrors our initiatory procedure. In this way, the more we are investigated, the more masses of people are psychologically processed by the very people who seek to expose us. The meme that constitutes our essential structure is then successfully mimicked within the consciousness of those who investigate us. Success can then be measured precisely to the extent that our work is exposed. And very fascinating, this lending to the idea that the controllers are playing truthers, or using them for disclosure. And we can take that with a grain of salt, but I found it very interesting. Welcome. And it's now 5 in the morning, and perhaps I'm a little irritated. This is a subject I want to dedicate to a whole video, but it's not going to happen this morning. But it's long overdue. They currently tell us there are 8 billion people in the world. Really almost no growth in the first 100 years of this chart, and suddenly we begin to boom around 1950. And when we look at our realm, we see that there is no shortage of a highly advanced past civilization, found not only in populous areas, but in swamps, deserts, and other types of wastelands, indicating that the population was not only more advanced, but much larger. And this little population chart really seems to just be our reset chart. Follow this back another 100 years, another 200 years, and you barely have a population to justify the wonders we see on every continent. And this seems to contradict everything that we see with our own eyes. And today I'm just tagging along with another YouTube channel in the comfort of my own home. And one day I hope to explore exotic places like this. And here this particular channel has gone and visited a city called Bamyan in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is home to something that I think you've all seen. And it's these Buddhas. These amazing Buddhas carved into a mountain and said to have been carved over 1,500 years ago. And this is an old look because in modern times the Taliban has destroyed these Buddha carvings, blew them up with dynamite, and now this is what we have left. These big old holes. And frankly, I wasn't that impressed with the Buddha sculptures. I'm much more interested in these little openings, these little windows revealing a structure. And honestly, I think this is one of the best proofs for a melted building and melted cities. In this video, by this channel here, a great channel, one of the few people who has been to almost every country in the world. A great resource for someone like me who is stuck at home. And here again, a different angle. And of course we see these all over the place. Cappadocia, Turkey, even in New Mexico. No exception. The difference is, once you go into these places, we have passageways and finely preserved insides, faring much better than the outside. And again, we're told over 1,500 years ago, when we talk about the impossibility of constructing some of these buildings 200 years ago. But what can be said about carving out an entire mountain? And to me, it's not seeming like a mountain at all. We see chunks of rock in here, and clearly this was concrete. Even what looks like rebar sticking out, tucked away in a pretty remote part of Afghanistan. And even in these people's history, these were towns. And we're told that this destruction of these towns was created by Genghis Khan. Here they're telling us we're seeing a 12th century citadel that was destroyed by Genghis Khan. We can still see little openings in what appears to be mud, and the narrative is so ridiculous. We're told Genghis Khan was upset and told his army to destroy this city and bring down the walls. Well, here you go. With swords, horse, and bow and arrow, we're going to render a city into this condition? And even Drew here, realizing that this is ridiculous. I'm almost wondering if he watches any alternative history. Because when you look at this as the remains of a massive city, and imagine that Genghis Khan had anything to do with this destruction, the narrative begins to look very ridiculous. And I do think the story is true. However, the dating is not correct. And the idea that Genghis Khan was anything short of a king wielding some sort of high tech in a much more advanced past. Here we see another melted city in the background. And once again, this is the top. Once we go into these openings, we see a well-engineered structure. And here again, a look at what concrete looks like. And not red brick, but concrete. Seeing this aggregate stone mixed in, and yet we do see block lines as well. So perhaps a concrete block. And maybe that's why these are still standing and not turned into pure powder, sand, or mud. Here a tower, or what's left of it. And here as well, these structures looking almost like dirt, yet we see the remains. And this part of Afghanistan was said to be one of the safer regions. And shortly after he made this video, it was ravaged with some massive attacks. And again, I question the motives of all of these wars. And here an excellent example of what Jerry would call a pocket of survival. Look at this. Absolutely unbelievable. Obviously nobody came up here and built this. We can clearly see that this was part of the structure. You see the different levels, and for whatever reason, this little region has survived. I want to start out by looking at these Lyceum temples in Turkey. Tombs, temples, whatever they want to call them. And I find these to be an excellent case for a melted building. I also find it to be a good case for mud flood. And I want to explain mud flood, kind of a term that I think is used generically in this community. Anytime we see something buried, we typically call the matter mud, as if this mud had come from somewhere else, either washed away from other locations, and deposited over a building, and our understandings have come a long way. A mud flood could simply be the very building now sitting in its own destroyed material. Clearly what we see here is a building, not a mountain that has been hollowed out and had a facade carved over the face, but rather a structure that at one point was probably absolutely glorious, even in its ruins more intricate than our stupid cubes or skyscrapers. And again, I think our community muddies the waters very generically. Some say that everything was made of red brick. Yes, things were wiped out, and in many cases melted, but not always. In some cases, things were just turned into powder, or what looks like gypsum or sand, and in some cases just looking like mud, the faintest imprint of a building left. And here I think what we're seeing is concrete. No doubt, personally my favorite building material, and I think it's important to differentiate, to not throw everything under the blanket of our small understanding. And I am guilty of it in some cases, using Tartaria as a generic blanket term for expressing the past civilization, when Tartaria was in fact probably only one of thousands of factions of this great empire, building in the same architectural style all throughout our realm. And here another little look at these Lycian tombs. Anybody should be insulted by now when they're told something unexplainable is a tomb. This whole tomb thing started in our early years of miseducation in reference to the pyramids. And now in our research, there's no end. Everything of mysterious origin that comes close to revealing our past is labeled as a tomb. And most people see these famous pictures, and that's it. And when we really start to examine this complex, we begin to notice this is much more than just a stupid tomb. And here a recent discovery was made in this area, which is the reason I chose this subject for the moment. Excavation in a Turkish province have unearthed a 2,400-year-old rock tomb from the Lycian era. And here is just a little look at that. Here we can see where ground level was, and probably any of us have been walking around in nature and seen something unusual like this, and thought, oh, that's an interesting shape, without realizing that by digging at least one more foot, no more than two, the structure would begin to show itself. And I have no doubt that that's every single part of this realm. Everything is buried. And here, these were probably simply windows, and silica mixing with heat and mud and water has now turned this pane into a piece of stone. And these guys look like they just popped it out. I'd be very excited to see what's inside. And we know what's inside. We've seen so many of these insides that look like hell on the outside, and on the inside are absolutely pristine. Beautiful columns and intricate rooms and artwork. And here we're told this 40-year-old man was driving a bulldozer when he found a rock nearby, 4 meters underground. He then realized it was a historical artifact and asked for help from the Museum of Lycian Civilizations. Excavations carried out by the 3 archaeologists and 8 workers unearthed the rock tomb, which dates back to the 4th century. And it's not just us that's bewildered and finding all these new discoveries. It's the mainstream as well. The only difference is that they just throw these stupid dates, designations, and stories on these newly revealed sites, trying to perpetuate their lie. And this is interesting. The tomb's lower part is in the shape of a ship's bow, and the upper part is in the shape of a house. The tomb has the features of the Lycian architect and was carved from the bedrock. So just mind-blowing. Could this thing have been an ark? And as always, I don't know. Having a better feel for what isn't, and some in our community would say that this was wood, petrified. And maybe, just as the case with red brick, some would be brick, some concrete, and some wood. Nevertheless, a very fascinating discovery. The reason they're giving us for this buried structure is it was swallowed by silt when the Miros River flooded in the 6th century AD. And at this moment, I want to look at another kind of human warehouse, the prison, even in modern times, a very primitive means of dealing with social issues, mostly serving as overpriced hotels owned by corporate interest. And here is a prison that somebody left in a comment. I thank you for this. The Sugar House Prison. Sugar House is pretty much Salt Lake City. It's probably 5 miles at most southeast, and it was one of my favorite little parts of Salt Lake for a while. All of the old world had been preserved in Sugar House, and I used to say 15 years ago that I felt like I was in a little European quarter, and now I understand why. But even people who don't understand love this area for this reason. And now just about everything has been demolished, putting up apartment buildings and modern shopping centers. And situated next to a grand park called Sugar House Park with a lake. And little did I know that this castle used to sit in the park. And what was this castle? We're told a prison. And this was a prison, according to the narrative, for about 100 years, 1855 to 1951. And we're told the Utah Territorial Penitentiary was a prison in Sugar House on 180 acres. The prison housed more than 400 inmates. Unnecessary, already. Eventually it was moved to the city of Draper, and the former site is now occupied by Sugar House Park and Highland High School. Historically, we're told in January of 1852, Utah requested from Congress $70,000 for a penitentiary. Congress only approved $20,000, 1853, and plans were drawn up. So they didn't even give them half. But that doesn't stop them. Governor Brigham Young selects this 10-acre government-owned site 6 miles from downtown Salt Lake. 16 cozy cells were dug into the ground with iron bars on top. Comprised the original prison at a cost of $32,000. So going over budget, $32,000 for some holes in the ground with bars on top. Very primitive. And it was opened in 1855. In 1867, the Utah Territorial Legislature determined that the prison was inadequate and considered moving it. From 1871 to 1896, the penitentiary was federally operated by U.S. Marshals. The inmate expanded in 1875 to accommodate 300 individuals, with the construction of a new cell house and prison walls. So completely ridiculous. They're telling us for $32,000 they built 16 holes with bars on top, and yet this is the photo that we see. They later got some more money and were told they built these walls, and everything looking so old. And a complete lie. Why not tell us that they built it so elegantly, instead of telling us they built some holes in the ground. But they do show us a picture, so they show us one thing and tell us another thing. No mention of this castle. And just barbarians, these inheritors. In 1900s, executions began by the state and were carried out in the prison. Prior to that, death penalties were administered by the counties. Tickets were distributed in 1903 for the admission to publicly view an execution by firing squad. Absolute savagery. And with Salt Lake City growing, the local residents wanted the prison population relocated away from the city. And plans were approved for a new prison 22 miles south in the city of Draper. Since when do they care about the concerns of local residents, especially in this time period, after spending $32,000 on a castle? Within no time, plans to shut it down and demolish it. However, construction of this new facility was delayed because of World War II, and in 1951, the 575 inmates were transferred by bus to the new state prison. Just a ridiculous population, even at the very end of this prison's existence. And this part is fascinating. After 9 sticks of dynamite had little effect on the heavy walls of the penitentiary, the demolition of many sections had to be carried out stone by stone. Always a recurring theme, having a very difficult time even destroying the building. More detail given about the destruction than the construction, all too often. And yes, now just a nice park with trees and a lake, and not too far away a little golf course. And we know all about golf courses. So again, in 1850 they tell us they start this prison, and the population in Salt Lake City is 6,000 people. And sorry, I'm not sure why the recording stopped, but I think we'll just conclude. Can we make any conclusions? I don't think we have enough to conclude anything. But what it looks like is the federal government may have had a hand in transplanting people to the Salt Lake Valley. In one breath, they tell us they were fleeing from the federal reach, trekking out into these far western, uninhabited lands. And in the next bit, we're told they're receiving all sorts of aid and Brigham Young, working in cahoots with the government, not to build anything of great importance or infrastructure, but prisons. And more importantly, the timelines are just too tight. All of this happening within years of the arrival of the pioneers. The writers of the narrative being very sloppy, cramming too much into a short window, perhaps in desperation. So that's it. I thank you so much for joining me. Do check out my new website at JonLeviChannel.com. And of course, have a blessed day. Please like, comment, and subscribe.